Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, fellow neuro Sarc patient Katie Pantea joins me with her story.
As my neuro Sarc kind of progressed over the course of the year, I actually kind of became progressively demented.
Katie was in the right place at the right time. It turns out she's also a nurse and not far from a sarcoidosis center.
So I'm a nurse in a pulmonary office. My office is located just over an hour south of like the Cleveland area, and we're just west of Lake Canton, Ohio. And so I have been there, it'll be 20 years next year, so a long time.
It's all coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
This is the Sarc Fighter Podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome to episode 138 of the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. As Tyler said, I'm your host, John Carlin. The date of this recording, the part where I'm speaking now, is May 14th, 2025. The recording with Katie was a few weeks earlier. And right now, I am just a couple of days late in uploading this podcast because I think I have a good excuse. I have been out of the country in the Netherlands and in Belgium on a bicycling vacation, which was absolutely amazing and just kind of a dream come true, something I've been looking forward to. It's been scheduled and on my calendar for a long, long time, and now it has come and gone, and all I have are the memories and the pictures and maybe a video still soon to be released on YouTube, but I'll save that for another time. But it was just an amazing vacation. Of course, back to the matter at hand, I want to remind you that I do this podcast because I want to help you see hope and maybe a light at the end of the sarcoidosis tunnel. I do it to give us all a sense of community, and so we can all let one another know that there are other people out there who are fighting some version of the same battle that we are. We're all suffering the effects. We all want answers, and in many cases, we are finding them. And, I will share with you that I did an interview earlier this morning. It won't be uploaded for probably about a month now because I'm a little bit ahead in terms of my conversations with people in the sarcoidosis space. But I did do an interview with a researcher named Dr. Courtney Montgomery at the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation. And they're doing some really interesting work in terms of looking at the genetic code that we all carry and figuring out which genes are out there that may make us more susceptible when we hit one of these triggers for sarcoidosis. So I can't really say, oh, this is what causes sarcoidosis, but there's been a lot of conversation lately surrounding the topic of, well, why did I get sarcoidosis when I was exposed to XYZ stimulant, let's say dust from a forest fire, and the person next to me didn't? And it could all come down to our genetic codes. And so Dr. Montgomery was sharing some really interesting findings that they are working on. She got right down to the molecular level and sort of talked about it. Very, very interesting. And I'm going to talk a little bit more before we go to the interview today on a new study that's been published in Sarcoidosis News. Well, that it's been published in a journal, and Sarcoidosis News is reporting on it. I'll talk about that in just a second. But all of that comes back to, in many cases, we are finding hope, and there you go, bada boom, bada bing. That's where some of that hope is coming from. Another way that you can find out more about what's going on with sarcoidosis, in fact, maybe the very best way, is we have the FSR Global Sarcoidosis Summit coming up. So if you're impacted by sarcoidosis and looking for answers, the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research invites all of you to attend the 2025 Virtual Global Sarcoidosis Summit. It's called United for Progress this year, a new chapter in sarcoidosis. So you're invited to join FSR's biggest event of the year. It's June 28th and 29th. June 28th and 29th. At that point, if you join, you'll be able to hear from world-renowned experts. You'll be able to connect with other people and get your sarcoidosis questions answered. It is a 2-day virtual event, and it will feature over 20 live and interactive virtual sessions to help empower patients, caregivers, and clinicians all to work together to, as they say, turn the page on sarcoidosis. So to learn more and to register, you can visit the FSR website link, which is www.stopsarcoidosis.org/sarcoidosis-summit. That's a lot to remember. You can either just go to the FSR website and search for it, and I'm almost certain it's on the front page, or you can click on the link in the show notes with this podcast. Registration does close on June 13th of 2025, so you'll want to get on there pretty quickly if you want to register. And again, there's a link at the website and in the show notes. So I hope to see you all there. I'm sure that I'll be pinging around and participating in many of those conversations. All right. Now, here's that update that I mentioned from Sarcoidosis News. They're reporting that gene mutations have been tied to a higher risk for sarcoidosis, not unlike the study and the conversation that I had with Dr. Montgomery in Oklahoma earlier this morning. Let me just skim that article for you and see if I can't hit some of the high points. This is by Marisa Wexler, MS. And again, it's in Sarcoidosis News. The date of this publication, I set it aside, but it came out on April 29th. And it says more than 24 mutations that seem to increase the risk of developing sarcoidosis have been identified in a new study. It says notably 17 of the 28 mutations had not been linked to the inflammatory disease. And so I'm gonna have to skim around because it gets very technical very fast, but stay with me here. The first paragraph says that higher genetically predicted body mass index and higher levels of several proteins involved in inflammation are also significantly linked to a higher sarcoidosis risk. BMI, as you probably know, is the ratio of height and weight that's used to as a proxy of body fat. So basically, I don't know, I see people talking about it at the gym and they say, well, you have a higher BMI if you're too heavy. And then I hear a lot of people saying, well, geez, I work out 5 days a week and, my clothes fit fine. I'm a size 6. How can that possibly be? So I'm not going to go there, but you know what BMI is. But the study uses BMI in a more scientific fashion. And the study was called GWAS, identifies genetic loci, lifestyle factors, and circulating biomarkers that are the risk factors for sarcoidosis. And the study was published in Nature Communications. And they go on and they back up a little bit. They talk about what sarcoidosis is. We all know that. So as I look down and I'm skimming this longer article, it says results showed 28 different mutations were significantly linked with a higher sarcoidosis risk. 11 mutations have been previously linked to the disease, but the remaining 17 had not. When restricted by ancestry, there were 24 sarcoidosis-associated mutations among patients with European ancestry and 3 mutations for African Americans. The researchers are emphasizing that they can only identify associations and that more studies are needed to explore what role these mutations may play in developing sarcoidosis. The researchers looked at genetic markers linked to 2 measures of body fat, BMI, and waist to hip ratio, and 4 different lifestyle factors, including smoking, alcohol and coffee consumption, and moderate to vigorous physical activity. The results suggested that higher genetically predicted BMI was significantly associated with a higher risk for sarcoidosis. So if you are fatter, you are more likely to have sarcoidosis, according to this study. Previous research had suggested a link between obesity and sarcoidosis risk, and the current data reinforce the notion that excessive body weight may escalate sarcoidosis risk, according to the researchers. Those who said their MR analysis was based mainly on data from people of European descent, so the studies may not apply in other populations. I'm not sure what the takeaway is from that. And then they talked a little bit about the inflammatory marker called interleukin-23 receptors and 8 circulating proteins that may have also been involved with inflammation were significantly associated with sarcoidosis risk. These inflammatory markers, the article concludes, might be useful as targets for treating sarcoidosis treatment, and the researchers said that they emphasized again that further studies may be necessary. And so some of that's a little confusing, even to me, and I talk to a lot of researchers, but again, that is completely consistent with what they were finding at the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation and my conversation with Dr. Courtney Montgomery. And she makes it sound a lot more understandable. But it's interesting. I have a couple of takeaways from this. Number one, it's interesting that they're saying that a high body mass index, a higher BMI, means you're more likely to have sarcoidosis. And that's not necessarily the cause of it. It could be you're predisposed because of some gene to have a higher BMI, and that you may also be predisposed to sarcoidosis because of that same gene or something related to it. So that's not just because you have the high body mass index. That's the kind of thing that they're looking at. Like they keep saying why. It's like, I'm fat. Well, why are you fat? Well, maybe you eat too much, or maybe you have a gene that makes it harder for you to lose weight. And if you have that gene, why are you predisposed to have sarcoidosis? And is there another gene? And is there another protein? And is there another variant? And they're getting right down. I mean, you talk about getting granular. That's what they're doing. And I think this is fascinating, and I think it's reasons for hope. And I think, my takeaway is that they're making progress. They're starting to figure this stuff out. And that's where that hope comes from. Okay. I don't want to bore you with too many details about my great expedition in Europe, but it is front and center in my mind. As I sit here in my home office, just 3 days ago, I was having breakfast in Brussels, in Belgium, and actually in Bruges is where I had breakfast, and then I traveled to Brussels to the airport on the train, and then flew back to Washington, D.C., and then another flight to Roanoke, and here I am. But as you might expect, the cycling there was amazing. We did just under, I guess about 100. It was about 195 miles over 5 days, and once again, it reinforces my notion that the best way to see the world is from the seat of a bicycle. We were riding along canals. We did a lot of walking tours. We made chocolates in Bruges. Like Bruges is one of the chocolate capitals of the world, and we actually took a cooking class on how to make these really fancy chocolates and to learn to tell the difference between a chocolate that's well made or chocolate that is machine made, which looks very different. Chocolate's supposed to be shiny and a little bit crispy, and if it's not, you probably are not getting a chocolate that was done just right. And it was fascinating to see all this. So we did that in Bruges. And by the way, Bruges calls itself the Venice of the North. and there were these canals all through this little city. And so we took a boat tour through the city. We did a walking tour and learned a lot about the history. And one of the interesting things about Bruges is some of the buildings are medieval. Most of them are going to date back to the 16 and 1700s. And the Nazis had overtaken Bruges pretty easily. They overtook all of Belgium pretty easily in World War II. And the captain of the who was in charge of holding Bruges was ordered to destroy it as the Nazis retreated. And he felt that Bruges was so beautiful he just couldn't do it, and he didn't. So the Nazis retreated, and so Bruges is still this beautiful, beautiful town, and the buildings are intact, and it's absolutely gorgeous if you ever get a chance to go there. And of course, I mentioned all about the chocolate. The other thing Belgium's famous for is its beer. I will say that I partook in a fair amount of both, and it was nice for me. I always want to bring it back to sarcoidosis because of that's what the podcast is about, and I just want to bring it back to be able to do this bike ride and tour and see all this, even though I've been diagnosed with sarcoidosis and have sarcoidosis. It's again, it makes me even more thankful for the opportunity to go and do this and accomplish it, and to ride my bike and to do it reasonably well. I was certainly not one of the stronger cyclists on this ride. I was off the back a little bit, but I held my own. And, it's been 6 years now since my last sarcoidosis flare. Knock on wood. Let's hope it stays that way. And so, yeah, just happy to be able to say that there is light at the other end of the tunnel, and that within that light you can go out and accomplish things like this vacation that I just got back from. All right. Coming up, my conversation with Katie Pantea, who, as we heard, has neuro Sarc, but also other organ involvement, including ocular. She's very frank and very forthcoming about her battle with the disease, and that's up next here on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter Podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter Podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. Joining me today is fellow Sarc Fighter Katie Pantea, and she has multiple organ sarcoidosis involvement. Katie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Yeah. So you're a fellow neuro Sarc person, but you also have pulmonary as well. What do you think is having more of an impact on your life, first of all?
Actually, I also have ocular sarcoidosis.
Oh, great. Let's throw that in.
I would say that's been my biggest challenge, is the ocular sarcoid. So it's still not completely at bay. My pulmonary stuff has pretty well been quiet, haven't had any issues with it. So I've at least got that part sorted out.
Okay. So ocular, how bad is your vision? What's going on?
I did have laser vision correction done about 12 years ago. So visual acuity, as far as, distance reading and sight and so forth, tends to be pretty good. So most of my ocular issues are posterior, so they involve the retina and the optic nerve. So a lot of times light, just the way that your brain interprets incoming light is distorted. So I get a lot of flashes and floaters. I don't drive at night as a general rule these
Mm-hmm.
days. So between headlights and then my depth perception, is that car getting off at this off ramp or is it going straight? So I just leave all of that to my husband now.
Wow, that's so flashes and floaters because a few floaters is kind of normal for most people, but when you have a lot more floaters, that's when it really becomes a sarcoidosis related issue and a problem, right?
Right.
Outstanding. So you're a nurse by trade, yes?
That's correct.
All right. And we're not going to say where you work, but you happen to have been in the right place at the right time. So you work in a hospital where there are a few people who know some things about sarcoidosis.
Right.
So you're a classic case of somebody being in the right place at the right time. Do you want to kind of share the trajectory of your diagnosis and the help that you got?
Yeah. So I actually kind of made some Cliff's notes here because as my neurosarc kind of progressed over the course of the year, I actually kind of became progressively demented. So there's a lot of things that being able to kind of look in, my chart accounts and read office notes and talk to coworkers and family members, you can kind of piece things together. And in hindsight, things are kind of 2020, but I'm not always the best historian as to the course of what I call 2021,
Sure.
which
No.
was, yes. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm a
So
nurse.
let's go through your notes. Do it.
Yeah, so I'm a nurse in a pulmonary office. Um, my office is located just over an hour south of like the Cleveland area, and we're just west of Lake Canton, Ohio. And so I have been there, it'll be 20 years next year, so a long time, which is
Okay.
great. So when my symptoms first started, they started as just a frontal headache, a lot of pain underneath my eyebrows and pressure behind my eyes. So of course, my first thought is, well, I've got a sinus infection. So I had mentioned something to my pulmonologist and I said, does this seem to add up? And he goes, yeah, I think I'm going to give you a 21-day course of Augmentin. I said, 21 days? That's a lot. He goes, trust me, like if the pressure is that bad, this'll cure what ails you. So I completed that course. And of course, my symptoms did not get better.
Right.
So went to family practice and I said, I have these headaches. I'm getting them every day. I'm using ibuprofen. The ibuprofen seems to help, kind of keep things maintained so I can function. But I also kind of felt like you feel when you're coming down with the flu, but the shoe hasn't dropped just yet. So
Yes.
just that overall like tired and achy and low grade temperature and just, you can go about your day, but you just don't feel great doing it. So they ran a whole series of labs checking inflammatory markers and like rheumatoid factor. All of that stuff came back fine. There was one lab that came back a little bit elevated, and it was called an IgE, which is an immunoglobulin that your body produces when you have some kind of allergic component going on. And so I did see an allergist and had allergy testing done. We already knew I had multiple environmental allergies from years back. I was on shots before for about 5 years. So, allergy really didn't come up with anything as far as why, the headaches were occurring.
Yep.
And so about March, I finally had a headache that was so bad that my husband ended up taking me to our local ER. And when I was in there, they gave me, a headache cocktail. So usually it's like some Benadryl and Reglan and, some kind of anti-inflammatory.
Right. So are they
And
thinking migraines at that point?
yes.
Okay.
And they said, you really need to see a neurologist. And I said, okay, fair enough. So I saw a local neurologist here and they had recommended doing like some B vitamins and magnesium supplementation and an herb called feverfew.
I've heard of that. I've
Okay,
actually
yeah.
I've grown feverfew, believe it or not.
Have you really?
Yeah,
Well, if
just
you get
because,
migraines, apparently
yeah,
that's your answer.
right. My mother had an herb garden way back when she gave me some. And I never used it for anything, but and I didn't know if that was true. I just thought that was like some of the herb garden lore. But
Yeah,
it
yeah,
actually
apparently
gave you
that's a
some, huh?
thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So started taking the supplement and went into primary care for a follow-up, and they said, your symptoms might be post-COVID in nature. And I said, well, to my knowledge, I've never tested positive for COVID. They said, well,
Yeah.
you may have had an asymptomatic case. And at this point, COVID was still so new that they really didn't know if you had an asymptomatic case, could you still then go on to develop like a post-COVID, chronic condition. So they said, a lot of these low-grade temps and your headaches, they may just be related to like a post-COVID syndrome. And in the meantime, and like I said, hindsight's always 2020. I messaged neurology because I said, these supplements aren't working. I'm still getting a headache every day. But now I've also developed a dry cough. And I think I might be allergic to this feverfew.
Okay.
The dry cough is probably sarcoid.
Oh, okay. All right.
So, they told me, well, you haven't given these enough time to work. You usually need to give any migraine treatment between 3 and 4 months before we throw it on the back burner. And you also need to stop taking ibuprofen every day because you're going to develop a rebound headache. And my first thought was, okay, well, I'm, a full-time working mom of a 3-year-old with a household to manage and, a job to go to. How am I supposed to function if I don't take this ibuprofen because, the supplements aren't working? And so there was one day in April, I was driving home from work and I got to a particular point in my trip that, of course, I'd made for the last 10 plus years. And it occurred to me that I didn't remember any part of the drive up until that point. So just totally went blank. And so I pulled off on the next exit ramp because I knew something wasn't right. And I called my husband and I said, hey, I'm parked here. I need you to come meet me because something's not right. So he came. By the time he showed up, my speech was slurred and I was complaining of numbness down one side of my face and in my arm and down a leg. And so, of course, my first thought is, oh my God, I'm having a stroke.
Stroke. Yeah.
Right. So back to the ER we went, and they put me through CT of the brain. That looked okay. They did teleconference in a neurologist, I think from Ohio State was who they get their teleconference through. And they were showing me a series of pictures, like a house. Okay, what's this? That's a car. I guess at one point they had shown me a picture of a key, and I didn't know the word for key, couldn't process that.
Wow.
And then they were having me repeat like 2-phrase, sentences, say black cat. And I'd say cat. No, black cat. So I couldn't get out that first part. They said, this may be part of like a migraine process, but we're going to have her admitted because she probably needs an MRI of her brain, and we just want to make sure everything looks all right. So I did have an MRI of my brain done. They told me that was negative, and they started me on a daily migraine medication. It was Topamax. So they use that, for seizures, and they use it for migraine prevention. And they had given me something quick acting. I think it was Nurtec to use if I get a breakthrough headache. And so went back to neurology locally, still having headaches. However, when I was discharged in April, in addition to the Topamax and the Nurtec, they had given me a Medrol dose pack. So for people who aren't familiar with Medrol, it's like prednisone, tapering course for like 32 days. And so when I went back and saw neuro in May for my hospital follow-up, I had mentioned to them that I had been headache free for 4 weeks, but now the headaches were back.
Okay.
And I
But now
said,
they're starting to say, the
right,
steroids
right.
work, right?
And I was just exhausted. Part of that was probably sarcoid. Part of it was, of course, anybody who's tapered off of prednisone knows it's a tiring process in and of itself.
And you have a
So,
3-year-old.
yes. So, the headaches were kind of coming back. I was really tired. So they said, well, some of your fatigue might be from the Topamax itself, but they said, we're going to switch you to a medicine called propranolol, which it's a medicine they use for blood pressure, and it kind of slows the heart rate down, but they use that for migraine prophylaxis as well. And again, still having the low grade temps multiple days a week. They still thought it was like a post-COVID. And I also said that I noticed my vision was getting kind of hazy and blurry at times. And they said, well, this is all very classic, complex migraine related type symptoms.
Huh.
So, I took that at their word, and the next few months, things just went really downhill. So I basically get home from work and I go right to sleep on the couch, and I wouldn't wake back up until I had to get up and go to work the next day. So my husband was working 7 days a week, mandatory overtime on the weekends, plus coming home, dealing with me, who, was comatose most of the time, and attending to our daughter. So God bless him, because that was a lot. And so, in the meantime, my 3-year-old's watching mom sleep on the couch all the time and feel sick and take these meds. And so I guess at work, my respiratory therapist had told me if we were carrying on a conversation that I would stop mid-sentence and just blank stare for a period of time.
Wow.
And then I would kind of come back to and finish the rest of my sentence like it never happened. People would check in for appointments, and they would sit out there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes or so. And someone would finally say, hey, did you go room John yet? Oh, and then I have to go and get them. So couldn't find paperwork, that would be places it always was.
That's just awful. And so but at this point, you've had a CAT scan and an MRI, and they haven't seen anything on the images.
Haven't seen anything on the images. So eventually my coworkers got so concerned that they had asked one of the nurse managers that they liked really well to come up and babysit me for a day to see if, they're like, this is not characteristic of her. We've all worked with her for, 10 years or more. There's something going on. We don't know if it's like a brain tumor or something's not right.
Yeah.
So she came to babysit me the beginning of October. And incidentally, that particular day, I had a patient come in for an allergy injection. And I went to go to where we kept the vials in our refrigerator, and I couldn't find the refrigerator. So
no way.
So,
well, they hide in plain sight sometimes.
Right. So I'm asking the respiratory therapist if they had moved it somewhere, and she said, no, let me take you there. So, took me over to where the fridge is. And in the meantime, she's telling the nurse manager, like, see? And as I'm drawing up this allergy shot, apparently I got stiff and I lost consciousness. So, they're saying my name, not responding. So they got me into a chair there at the nurse's desk, and they went and grabbed the physician assistant who was working and the pulmonologist and said, you got to get out here. And the pulmonologist looked at me, and apparently he told them, well, you should probably put her on the floor because she can't fall if she's already there. So
good idea.
Yep. So they lowered me to the floor. They had called the squad. And when I kind of came to, I just remember I was laying on the floor looking up at my nurse manager, who's like, you okay? And I guess the first few minutes, I had kind of had some slurred speech and some issues kind of coming to. But once the squad got there, they asked me what I thought had happened. And I said, well, I think I probably fainted. And they said, well, have you ever fainted before or had this problem before? I said, no, never. And my respiratory therapist is like, yes, this has happened before. So they took me over to the ER at our local hospital. And incidentally, that particular day, the physician assistant who works in my office, her husband was the attending physician in the ER. And so she had already been on the phone with him and gave him all of the information. And so he was able to pull the strings to get me transferred up to Cleveland Clinic.
Okay.
So I got up there in the middle of the night, and this very nice neurology resident came in to see me. And he said, I want to do a CAT scan of your head and your neck. Because no one's imaged your neck before. There might be something vascular going on. I just want to make sure we don't miss it. And that CAT scan just happened to clip the upper lobes of my lungs, and they found nodules.
In your lungs.
Yep. So they had to do a full CT chest. And so that showed that I had numerous nodules in my lungs and also swollen lymph nodes in the center of my chest. And so, my husband at first was concerned, about like malignancy. And I said, no, I've seen enough of this, that this isn't a malignant looking thing. And they had brought up that they wanted to refer me to one of the sarcoid pulmonologists up there at main campus, Dr. Ribeiro, actually.
My doctor.
Your doctor.
Yeah.
And mine now too.
Right.
And I told them, no, I didn't want to see him. I said, I already have a pulmonologist I can see, and he's already looked at my scan, and I've already arranged to meet with him when I get discharged. And so they were like, okay, as long as someone's going to follow up on these nodules. And I told my husband, I said, well, with sarcoidosis, because it was something I was somewhat familiar with working in general pulmonary. So we see asthma and COPD and bronchiectasis and whatnot. Most of the sarcoid that we see is either stuff that's found by accident when they're looking for something else. People don't really have any symptoms, or if they do, they have a dry cough, for 3 or more months. We set them up with a 90-day course of prednisone or so, recheck their CT, make sure things don't look any different, and then they go on their way. So I figured that would be the case for me as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So, had to go through the whole procedure of getting the EBUS bronchoscopy done, which I was already familiar with because I'd been in a bronch suite before. I knew what the procedure was like. And my pulmonologist tried to order me a new MRI of my brain because he suspected that this was neurosarc.
Uh-huh.
And insurance says, no, she just had one in April. We're not going to approve a second one.
Of course.
Of course. And so, at that point at home, I was pretty much sleeping 20 hours a day. And if I tried to get up and walk unassisted, I was falling. So I still have some things around the house that I broke from falling into them when I was doing so bad. My mom had to pick up my daughter in the morning when my husband was working. And then he would pick her up when he got off work because it's like I couldn't be trusted to take care of her when I was demented and asleep most of the day.
Yeah.
I forgot to pay my car insurance apparently for a few months. So my husband had to set up some auto pay on some things that we had around the house. I needed help like showering. I couldn't tie my own shoes. It was pretty miserable. So the results from the EBUS come back and hey, I have granulomas in my lymph node biopsy. So that sealed the deal. But I was so demented at that point in time that I couldn't even put 2 and 2 together myself, knowing what I knew about pulmonary sarcoid. And I had gone back to my neurologist then around Thanksgiving, and he knew that they were working me up for sarcoid. and he had the pathology report available to him. And he said, I think we should try Botox.
Botox?
And he did not divert from the migraine path. You know, and I had told him my vision was getting worse. I couldn't read my phone. It was too blurry to read my phone. If I was watching the news, which, you know, is your area of expertise.
Yeah, you got to be able to watch the news. Come on.
If there was a crawl on the bottom, couldn't read the crawl, couldn't see it. And it got to a point where if, you know, I was looking straight ahead, I'd get just a black spot in my central vision, and I'd have peripheral vision, but nothing in the middle. And that would last for 5 minutes or so. And then eventually I would kind of regain that sight back to where it was just blurry again. But he said, yep, we should do some Botox. And he's like, we'll send for the authorization on the Botox. And, you know, we'll let you know when it gets approved. And in the meantime, my pulmonologist I had been seeing had put in a referral or had sent a message to Dr. Moss, who's the sarcoid neurologist up at main campus at Cleveland Clinic.
Also my doctor.
Yes. And he said, hey, do you think you can order my nurse an MRI of her brain? And he said, sure. So he ordered an MRI, and insurance said, you've never seen this patient. So needless to say, I had to go in and see Dr. Moss. And when I went in to see him, I don't really remember much from that visit, but I remember my brother had to drive me up there. He took a day off work to drive me up.
Wow.
And I had apparently called my mom and put her on speakerphone. And my mom is somebody who I don't like to involve in my medical care a lot. She's very like opinionated and always thinks she knows best because that's what moms do.
Sure.
So I'm a little surprised at myself that I actually called her and put her on speakerphone. But she had told him that, you know, several times a week, I would develop a crooked mouth. So a droop, Bell's palsy, probably.
Palsy, yeah.
And that I would start repeating like a series of numbers or words that just made no sense in any kind of context. And this was happening, you know, several times a week. And Dr. Moss was able to get the images from the MRI I had in April. And he said, you know, the radiologist read this as normal, but when I look at it, there looks like there's a little bit of what we call leptomeningeal enhancement, which is like a swelling of the lining of the brain. It's a meningitis.
Right. Yeah.
So he's like, you know, so this was not normal. And when he did my exam, he had mentioned that my gait was ataxic. So I walked like a drunk person. And I also had what's called nystagmus. So if you are following someone's finger from side to side, like they do at a roadside DUI stop, if you get extra beats in your eye, that's nystagmus. And also I had what they call hyperreflexia. So all of my reflexes were very spastic and quick.
Yep.
And I also had a positive plantar reflex. So when babies are born, if you strike the bottom of their foot, their toes kind of fan out. And once you hit about 12 months old, when you stroke the bottom of the foot, the toes curl down. So for that to occur in an adult usually is a sign that there's something abnormal, you know, in the central nervous system. So, you know, he reordered another MRI. And I think just based on all of the findings in his exam, you know, which he said were new since my last admission in April, you know, I need repeat imaging. So he then told me, you need to go see Dr. Ribeiro. So
the pulmonologist.
Right.
Yeah.
So I did go see him, and incidentally, the pulmonologist that I had been working with taught Dr. Ribeiro how to do bronchoscopies when he was a fellow.
No way. Small world.
Very small world. So it went full circle. So I saw Dr. Ribeiro then in January, and I got diagnosed officially. And he started me on 20 milligrams of prednisone a day and methotrexate injections.
Yep.
So we were doing 20 milligrams a day of the methotrexate, or a week, sorry, of the
Prednisone,
methotrexate, and then
Right.
20 of the prednisone.
That's kind of low compared to what you had. I'm surprised.
Yeah. So I did get a repeat MRI then a few days later, and that leptomeningeal enhancement was very diffuse throughout the brain, and also my cervical and thoracic spinal cord had meningitis. So
Meningitis looking or actually meningitis?
well, when you have meningitis as a neuro-sarc patient, it's what they call aseptic meningitis, so it's not infectious.
Okay.
So it's like an autoimmune meningitis, essentially.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. So that's pretty similar to what I have. No one
Yeah.
ever called it meningitis before. Okay.
Yep. So, I started taking the meds, and a couple weeks later, I got a phone call from my mom, and she's like, I've been reading up on this methotrexate.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, that's a cytotoxic drug, and it's chemotherapy, and it'll destroy your kidney and your liver, and I don't think you should take this medication. And I said, they're doing labs every month to make sure that my kidney and liver function stays normal. And I said, yesterday I took clothes out of the washing machine and I put them in the dryer. And I can't tell you the last time I did that. And I was
Wow.
able to stand at the sink and do a couple dishes before I had to take a break. And so I said, I think I'm going to take these meds.
Because it's working.
Because I'm
time
seeing improvement, and that's something that, we hadn't had in an entire year. So I think that the treatment tide for me really turned then around Valentine's Day. I saw the ophthalmologist, and she's retired now, but she was fabulous. And, after a series of scans in ophthalmology, in an exam by her, it was determined I had pretty severe optic nerve edema. And I also had what's called retinal vasculitis. And so that is when the blood vessels in your retina start leaking into your macula.
Oh.
And so she looked at the meds that I was given thus far, and she's like, this prednisone dose will not do. So she's like, I'm going to order you some Solumedrol infusions. You're going to do those for 3 days. And we're going to increase your prednisone to 60 milligrams a day after that.
You go. There
yes.
you go. That's what I'm thinking. Okay.
Yes. And then we'll taper you down by 5 milligrams like every 2 weeks, as long as you tolerate that. And she's like, and methotrexate is not the right med for you right now. She said, we'll continue it, but we need to get you on Humira injections. So she's like, you need something stronger, something that's going to work now, not in 6 months, because, methotrexate takes a while to build up in the system. And she also had started me on a medication called acetazolamide, or Diamox, which is a diuretic that they use for people who have increased intracranial pressure. So if your body starts making too much cerebral spinal fluid, it will press on the brain and the optic nerve and cause it to swell. And so she suspected very much that I had increased intracranial pressure. So we left that appointment with a lot of information.
Well, you sure did.
Yeah.
But finally, you're getting to where you needed to be.
Right.
Yep.
My husband had made a comment on that drive home, and I'll never forget it, because he was so frustrated the whole year. He's like, you see a different doctor and they give you a pill and it doesn't work. So then you see another doctor and they give you another pill and that pill doesn't work. And he said, I think maybe we're finally seeing people who know what they're doing.
Right.
And he was just so relieved, because you could tell that, everyone was in communication with each other and things were moved through very quickly. And I was progressing. So like even at home, I was able to do a little bit more. I decided, I really needed to start getting some exercise. Prednisone makes you gain an obnoxious amount of weight, especially when you can't move and you're used to moving.
Yeah. Would you have described yourself as an active person?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Runner,
Um,
walker,
like you, I was a
volleyball
runner.
player?
I
Okay.
wasn't gunning for the Boston,
Okay.
but I did 5 and 10Ks. I spent like 3 nights a week in a dance studio. I
Okay.
did tap dance and jazz, and I did ballet. I was on point, which those days are
Wow.
long over now.
Yeah.
And the thing that kept me the most active is I was designing for an all-age drum and bugle corps out of the Akron area, and I was the color guard instructor.
Wow.
So if anyone's not really familiar with drum and bugle corps, I say it kind of has the precision of like, your marching band, but it's also very theatrical, like a Broadway show,
Yeah.
and use that. But the practices are grueling. You're outside 12 hours a day in the blazing sun, and it's a lot. It
Yeah.
takes a lot of endurance.
So you're fitting the model of the people who've been on this
I
podcast.
know it's a broken
Extremely
record.
active. Yep. Yep.
It's a
Well,
broken record.
yeah.
So yeah, and it got to a point where I'm like, well, I need to move. And I was making it like to the end of my driveway and back, and that was it. But the next day you walk to the next driveway and then you turn around and come back. And then before you know it, you can make it around the block, stopping multiple times,
Mhm.
But I remember the first time I actually made it around the block, which is about a half a mile, and it took me about 20 minutes. And I sat down a few times, to kind of take a break, but it was progress. So it takes a lot to kind of rebuild to where you were before. Um, and so yeah, the meds were working very, very well. I did end up getting a lumbar puncture done, and
Mhm.
of course I was already on the Diamox, and they usually like to see an opening pressure between like 5 and 20, I think it is. So I was at 28, so high, not ungodly, but high.
Right. That's a spinal
Um,
tap, right? The
right.
lumbar puncture. Yeah. Just
Yep, spinal tap.
because
So
you're so conversant with medical terms, but
I know I've got to like layman term it down
yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit.
But I had one of those as well. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So not something that's usually on my to-do list is
Mm-mm.
to go get a spinal tap done. But I was
Yeah.
already on Diamox.
I think I went to
So
work that same day. I think I had a spinal tap in the morning and went to work in the afternoon.
I went to work the next day.
Yeah.
But by this point I was back to work, which was good. But they did increase the Diamox then at that point. So they said, we're going to up your dose a little bit. And then when all of this was said and done, I got a phone call from my prior neurologist's office and said, hey, we have your Botox. We need to get you scheduled. And so, and that little nurse, she was kind of snotty with me. And I said, well, I don't need the Botox anymore. I don't have headaches anymore. And I said, I figured out what was wrong, and, I'm seeing another neurologist, and, I'm on these other meds. And she's like, what is it you have? So I spelled it for her.
Sarcoid. Yeah.
And she's like, well, I'm going to have to go talk to him. So she called me back about 5 minutes later, and she's like, yeah, he said, you really should just follow with Dr. Moss.
No kidding. Yeah.
Unless you want to put up my crow's feet, I
Right.
don't need the Botox anymore.
Right. There you go. Right. Wow. So that was all that was a great story, by the way. But all of that was over the course of a year. Did that all
Yeah.
happen in 12 months from the time that you were driving and you didn't know where you were, and then everything else that happened, couldn't find the refrigerator.
Right.
And so, but within 12 months, you finally got to, wow, this is sarcoidosis.
Yes.
Wow, prednisone. Gee, something's working. I don't feel so bad anymore. But so ultimately, you had inflammation in your spinal cord, right? You had inflammation in the lining of your brain, and you had optic and pulmonary involvement as well.
Correct.
Wow. And now I'm talking, so how long ago was that? Because you seem completely normal in our conversation here today, where, this is 2025. It's March 31st as we're talking. The podcast will come out, several weeks later, but you seem fine.
I think I have a very good sense of humor about it. That's the
Wow.
first thing.
Good for you.
I feel very lucky, just like you said, in the right place at the right time. And, I have a great team. I'm very, very fortunate that I've responded to the medications as well as I have. I know some people rotate on and off things, or they don't respond to the meds very well. So I've done quite well on all of that. And as far as residual symptoms at this point, I can't feel my right foot. So I've got like a permanent paresthesia, I guess, in my right foot. And my hands, if I have to do anything that requires fine motor skills. So, if I'm holding a pencil for a period of time, or, for women, for vanity's sake, you're putting on your eye makeup, my hands will cramp up and I'll drop things. So,
Same.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't drop it, but my hand will cramp up, or like if I'm holding onto the steering wheel for a long time.
Yeah.
And I'll be like opening my hand and closing it. And my wife will say, "What's wrong with you, John?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I guess I was just gripping the steering wheel." But
Right.
So it's something that has to do with neuropathy.
It has to be. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. That's interesting.
So,
You're the first person I've talked to that had the same thing.
Yeah. So
Okay.
hand cramps, that's a big thing. And, vision wise, we kind of already talked about, why I don't drive at night anymore.
Yep.
Driving in the rain, if it's really heavy rain, don't like to do that either.
Yeah.
The floaters, they're just part of me now. So you don't know if you're swatting a fly away or if it's, just a floater.
Yeah. Have you returned to work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, like I said, 2021, I went downhill pretty rapidly. But I was back to work in April of 2022. And it may have been a little bit premature, but I would say by like July, I felt considerably better. And I think it was okay for me to return back when I did, just because the people I worked with were all very well versed in what I had. And I knew if I misbehaved in any way that they would know what to do about it. So, so I was very fortunate with that.
Yeah. So you are still on Humira and any prednisone?
No prednisone. So
was
able to come off the prednisone in July of 2022. And so I've been maintained with the Humira and the methotrexate and the Diamox since that time.
All right. So you are doing the methotrexate?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you tell your mother?
Oh, she knows.
Okay. All right. But you're getting regular blood tests to monitor your organ function?
Yes. Yep. Labs are perfectly fine. So my potassium is always low, but I think that's from the Diamox. And I take like 2 big horse pill potassiums every day. So
really,
that keeps my legs from cramping up in addition to my hands.
Wow, that's interesting. And so I was trying potassium for a while. My digestive system didn't like it.
Mm-hmm.
You're having trouble with that at all?
No.
Oh. Okay. Yeah.
Guts of steel here.
Okay. Because I do still get cramps. I'll wake up sometimes in the morning and my calf will have cramped in the night, and it's like I've got a bruise on my leg and I have to limp all day.
Yeah.
But then it goes away and I just like, okay, well, that's just life. That's the way it is. But the potassium is helping you.
Oh yeah. It's keeping the blood levels happy. I remember at one point, I think it got down, they like to see it between like 3.7 and above, up to about like 5.6, I think it is. And at one point it got down as low as 2.8. Yeah. And someone had called, I forget who it was, said, if your potassium gets any lower, we're going to have to admit you for IV potassium and supplementation. Wow. I said, but you don't have to admit me.
Yeah.
I said, I can just take more potassium, we'll take some extra doses.
I guess you can't eat enough bananas to just do that.
Oh no, that's not a thing. Can't take over the counter potassium either. I'd have to take I think I calculated it once, like 36 of what you usually get over the counter to be the equivalent of what I take prescription in one
Oh, so
day.
your potassium is prescription potassium.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Interesting. Interesting. All right. So, and how old's your daughter now?
She's now 7,
Wow.
and she is very in tune with mom. And so, when I first started on the meds, uh, she was 4 at that point. And, watching mom give herself shots every week is kind of awkward, I think, for a 4-year-old because, kids don't like getting shots.
Yeah.
So why would mom like getting shots? And so I kind of just made her part of that process. So, we go into the kitchen together and I, draw up my methotrexate and, is it on 8, Kennedy? Yeah, okay. So we know mommy's dose is right. I said, now we're going to pick a spot on mommy's belly. And she'd help me find a spot, swab it off and put my Band-Aid on. So I don't know many kids who have parents that give themselves injections all the time, but we just kind of normalized it. If you don't make it a big deal, then it's not a big deal. So it's just been very normal for her to know that mom gets these shots.
Wow. Well, that's good. That's good. And have you returned to drum and bugle at all?
Oh God, no. that chapter has closed. Between scorching hot days on a field and just the dexterity that you need to manipulate equipment, combined with the hand cramps, combined with remembering to project, combined with balance and lower body control, it's too much.
Too much. Yeah. So any 5Ks or 10Ks either? Or is that
I have ran a few 5Ks. I don't like to run very much, and I think it's because I'm afraid of falling. Especially if you can't feel a divot in a sidewalk or something the right way with the foot. But I can walk until, I could walk all day at this point and not have any issues.
Right. Do you have like a pins and needles effect on that right foot that's numb? Yeah. No gabapentin for that?
I think it's been offered to me before, and I've kind of looked at it like, my foot's asleep. It doesn't hurt. It's asleep. Yeah. So, I just kind of look at it like it is what it is. So I don't know if gabapentin would be useful, but I feel like I take enough stuff now.
Yeah. No sense taking something else.
Yeah, I'm like, being in labor is painful. Like having appendicitis is painful. Like this is not painful.
So, we on the podcast, I talk a lot about telling people that there's hope, that there's light at the end of the tunnel, that you can get through this. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be after effects, but you can get through it. And you're almost the perfect example of that, from passing out at work to everything that has happened to you, but they finally figured it out. They've got you on medication that's working. So, it's not the life you once had, but it's a good life. It's a life you can live, right?
Yeah, it's a slower paced life, I would say. Yeah. But you appreciate things a little bit more, I think, when you're taking things in at a slower pace, which there's value in that. And as far as, your day-to-day with neurosarc, I tell people it's kind of like living with a raccoon in your attic. So, the raccoon's very stubborn and you've set traps, and the raccoon's smart and it won't take the traps. So instead of fighting with it, you've just decided, you know what, I'll let you live up in the attic and pray you don't poop in my insulation and tear up my fuse box or chew on my wires or have babies. And I'm going to stay on my main floor, and I'm going to, try and keep my house as clean as I can and go about my day-to-day life the best way I can possibly do it. And there's going to be days where you hear that raccoon thumping up in the attic, and, you might yell at it or use a little profanity. I recommend profanity. And then you might go weeks or months and you don't hear the raccoon.
Right.
But you know it's there.
Yeah. That is an amazing analogy. Is that something you came up with all on your own?
Yes.
Wow, that's fantastic. I love
Mhm.
it. I love it. So what advice would you have for our fellow Sarc fighters then?
I would say, first and foremost, it's okay to like grieve the loss of your former self. Um, there's going to be doors that close when you get this diagnosis, but there's also going to be doors that open, which is not something that you always suspect. So I currently I volunteer with FSR, and I am a community group leader. So I run a support group, and I run the support group for Cleveland Clinic. So that's really great. It's good to get the correct information out to people. So we're avoiding misinformation and whatnot. And it's also allowed people that don't necessarily live in this area to join in and get good information to take back to their doctors who maybe don't know as much about Sarc. So that's been a door that's been opened for me. And again, I feel very lucky that, I live where I do. I'm close to Cleveland. I had good connections to get the right care. I've done well with my meds. So, if I can be value to other people, then that's what I'm going to do.
That's great. So how do people access your support group?
So if you're interested in joining Cleveland Clinic support group, if you go to FSR's website, there is a link for the community groups, and you can select Cleveland Clinic, and it will send me an email, and I will add you to our mailing list.
All right. And then do you do a regular Zoom call or something?
We use WebEx, so
WebEx,
very
okay.
similar to Zoom.
Yep.
It's just a more secure platform, I guess.
I'm familiar with it. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
yeah, with the clinic. So yeah, and we do virtual. Usually, it's the fourth Wednesday of every month at like 6 o'clock Eastern time. And yeah, it's great. We get together, and it's really nice, and it's really validating, I think, for people to talk to other people that experience the same things that they do. So we had one participant recently who joined us from like the East Coast of Canada,
Wow.
where they just don't have anything. And at the end of the session, she said, I have never sat down with a group of people that understand me, and I'm listening to all of you talk, and I think, well, I have that too. And she's like, it was just the best experience ever.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Katie, look, thank you so much for sharing your story and for running the support group and for everything you're doing as a volunteer with FSR, and just for being you. You've got a great positive outlook on life and a happy smile. And that's really important, I think, for people to see that.
Yes, good sense of humor, lots of profanity, and throw in some sarcasm, and you'll get through it.
There you go.
One day at a time.
Thanks for joining me today.
Hey, you bet, John. Thank you.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
So thanks to Katie for reaching out to me, agreeing to share her story, and being so forthcoming. Once again, it's just very much appreciated when people are willing to tell their sarcoidosis story. Please don't forget to join FSR for the annual summit on June 28th and 29th. There's a link to register in the show notes. This is a good time to contact me if you want to share your story on the podcast. The best thing to do is to email me at carlinagency@gmail.com. The official Sarc Fighter song is Zombie by Mark Steyer and the White Hot Lizards in Alberta, Canada. You can hear Mark's story, the story behind those lyrics, in episode 12. And Mark gave us an update on his condition back in episode 118, not too long ago. The podcast normally comes out every other Monday. Once again, I apologize. I'm 2 days late on releasing this one, and I feel terrible about that. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. Don't forget to follow Sarc Fighter on social media, Facebook, Instagram. Even I'm on Peloton as Sarc Fighter. And I do have a blog called Carlin the Cyclist, and I talk about all my cycling adventures, but there is a section there called Cycling with Sarcoidosis, and a lot of you adventure seekers who contact me who also have the disease may find it interesting to read about some of my travails there. If you're new here and you just want to know what sarcoidosis is, go back and listen to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. My story is episode 1. And again, you can always send me an email with a comment, or you can reach out to be on the show at carlinagency@gmail.com. Until next time, keep fighting.
Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace. Dead man walking,